I was sitting on a bench outside a cafe in Lisbon when my phone rang. It was my son. Not a birthday call. Not a holiday call. He was calling to tell me he was going to be the best man at his mother's wedding. I said congratulations. He didn't say anything back for a moment. Then he said, "You should know, Dad, he's everything you never were." I hung up and ordered another espresso. That was October. Let me back up. My name is not important to this story. What is important is that I spent 31 years being the kind of husband I thought a man was supposed to be. I worked. I provided. I showed up. I didn't drink. I didn't gamble. I didn't disappear on weekends. I coached Little League until my son was too old for it. I drove my daughter to violin practice every Thursday for 6 years, even after she told me she hated violin because her mother insisted it built discipline. I thought we had an agreement. Not written, not even spoken, but the kind of agreement two people build over 3 decades. You hold up your side, I hold up mine. We get through the hard parts. We come out the other end together. My wife's name was Claudette. She was a real estate agent. Residential properties, mostly in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. She was good at it. Better than good. In the last few years, before things fell apart, she was closing deals I didn't even know about. I was an engineer. Structural. 30 years with the same firm, the last 12 as a senior project manager. I was not flashy. I drove a Ford. I brought my lunch most days. We had a good house, a 4-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, paid down to about 60% of its original mortgage. We had 2 retirement accounts, one in my name, one in hers. We had a joint savings account that I contributed to automatically every month for years. I believed, genuinely believed, that we were building something together. The first sign that I was building alone came in March of the year I turned 62. I was getting ready to retire. Not immediately. I had another 18 months at the firm, then I'd ease out. We'd talked about it. We'd even made a loose plan. Travel some. Maybe spend winters somewhere warm. Maybe look at whether we wanted to downsize. Claudette had mentioned she might slow down on the real estate side once I retired. Spend more time together. Her words. In March, I got a letter from our mortgage servicer addressed to me personally. A past due notice. 60 days. I thought it was an error. I called the bank. It was not an error. Claudette had stopped making the mortgage payment in September. 6 months of payments. Gone. I went to our joint savings account to check the balance. There was $400 in it. The account had held over $40,000 the last time I checked, which I'll admit was probably 8 months before that. I trusted her. She handled the household finances. I made the money. She managed it. That was the arrangement we'd settled into somewhere around year 7. I did not call her. I sat at the kitchen table for about an hour. I went through every statement I could pull up online. Then I drove to our bank branch and asked to speak to someone in person. The story came out slowly over the following weeks. Claudette had been systematically moving money from our joint account into a personal account I didn't know existed. Not all at once, small amounts, irregular. The kind of movement that doesn't trigger alerts. She'd also refinanced the house the previous spring. I had signed the papers. I remembered signing papers. I don't remember them being for a cash-out refinance that pulled $240,000 in equity out of the house we'd spent 20 years paying down. My signature was on the documents. She'd had me sign them at the kitchen counter while I was reading the paper. She'd said it was something routine. I hadn't looked carefully enough. That's the part that kept me up at night, not the money. The fact that I hadn't looked. I didn't yell at her. I didn't even confront her dramatically. I called a lawyer first. I want to be clear about that. I called a lawyer before I said a single word to her. Something in me knew that if I didn't have my bearings legally before that conversation, she would find a way to make me the problem. The lawyer told me what I probably already knew. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally. The trick was that a lot of what I thought were marital assets had been quietly moved. I filed for divorce in April. Claudette was surprised. I don't think she expected me to move that fast. I think she expected me to be hurt and slow and confused and easy to manage. I'd been all those things before in our marriage. This time, I wasn't. What she did next tells you everything you need to know about who she became somewhere along the way. She called our son. His name is Terence. He was 34 at the time, living in Raleigh, doing well for himself in finance. He's smart. He got that from both of us. He also got something from his mother, a talent for reading a room and deciding which side of the room to stand on. Terence called me 2 days after I filed. He said he'd heard what I'd done. I asked him what he'd heard. He said his mother told him I had blindsided her, that I'd been planning to leave for years and had just never told her, that I was trying to take the house. I told him what actually happened. He said he didn't want to take sides. Taking no side is a side, but I didn't say that. I told him I loved him and I'd talk to him again when he was ready. He didn't call for 3 months. Our daughter Renee was different. She was 29, lived in Atlanta, and when she heard the full story, the account, the refinance, the mortgage, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." That was enough for me. She couldn't be in the middle of it either, and I didn't ask her to be. But she didn't disappear. The divorce took 14 months, not because it was contested violently, but because untangling what Claudette had done took time. My lawyer was thorough. We recovered a portion of the moved funds. I kept my retirement account. She kept hers. The house sold. After paying off the refinanced mortgage balance and splitting the remaining equity according to the settlement, I walked away with enough to restart. Not to live lavishly, but to live. That's what I wanted, not revenge, not to destroy her. Just to not be destroyed myself. I retired officially in November. The firm threw me a small party. My manager, a man I'd worked with for 20 years, shook my hand and told me I'd built things that would still be standing long after both of us were gone. I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. Home at that point was a furnished apartment in South Charlotte, a 1-bedroom. Sparse. I'd taken some furniture from the house, the essentials. It felt temporary because it was temporary. I'd been thinking about Portugal. I know how that sounds. A 62-year-old retired engineer from Charlotte deciding to move to Lisbon. People asked me if I was having a crisis. I told them I was having a clarity. There's a difference. I'd been to Lisbon once on a firm trip, years back. Just 3 days. I remembered the light there. The way it came off the river in the late afternoon. The way the old neighborhoods climbed the hills. The quiet on Sunday mornings. I remembered thinking, people live slowly here on purpose. I looked into the Portugal D7 visa, the passive income visa, my retirement income, pension plus Social Security, which I'd started taking at 62, was enough to qualify. The cost of living in Lisbon was roughly half of Charlotte. I could live well on what I had. I booked a one-way flight for January 3rd. I told Terence. He said, "You're running away." I told him I was going toward something, which is different. He said he didn't see the difference. I told Renee. She asked me to send her photos. I landed in Lisbon on a cold, clear January morning. The apartment I'd rented was in the Moraria neighborhood, up a narrow street that was too steep for most cars. 2 bedrooms. I wanted the extra room without knowing why exactly. A small balcony that faced east. On the first morning, I made coffee and stood on that balcony and watched the city wake up below me, and I thought, I haven't felt like myself in years. And I feel like myself right now. I want to be honest about the first weeks. They were hard in a way I hadn't expected. Not lonely exactly, more like untethered. I'd been defined by my work and my marriage for so long that without either, I had to figure out what was left. What was left, it turned out, was quite a lot. I started walking. Hours a day, just walking. The Alfama, Belli. The riverfront. I found a language school and enrolled in Portuguese classes 3 mornings a week. My teacher was a woman in her 60s named, and I'm not making this up, Graça, which means grace. She had enormous patience for my American accent and absolutely no patience for excuses. I liked her immediately. I found a cafe where the owner, a man about my age, would let me sit for 2 hours over one coffee without giving me the look. We started talking. His English was better than my Portuguese, but we mixed them together and got along fine. His name was Antonio. He'd been divorced 12 years. He told me the first year after is the year you find out who you actually are when nobody's watching. I wrote that down. I was finding out. Slowly. Carefully. Without rushing it. Around March, Renee called and mentioned, almost as an aside, that her mother had gotten engaged. I said, "Okay," she said. "You're not going to ask who?" I said, "Not particularly." She laughed, a little surprised. I meant it. But then she told me anyway. His name was Gordon. He was 67, recently widowed, and had made his money in commercial real estate development, the kind of money that gets you a name on a building somewhere. He'd met Claudette through a mutual contact in the Charlotte real estate world. They'd been dating since, by Renee's calculation, sometime the previous summer. I did the math quietly. The previous summer was about 2 months after I filed for divorce. I thought about Antonio and what he'd said about the first year. I thought about the light coming off the Tagus River in the afternoon. I thought about the fact that I was standing in my kitchen in Lisbon making pasta from scratch, something I'd never had time to do before, and Claudette was engaged to a man named Gordon. I felt, and this surprised me, almost nothing. A small flicker of something, not jealousy, more like recognition. This was who she had become. Or maybe who she'd always been and I'd just not been looking carefully enough. Then came the phone call from Terence. He called in September. He was going to be Gordon's best man. He wanted me to know. Not to ask permission, not to get my blessing, just to inform me, with a tone that suggested I might have a reaction worth managing. I said congratulations. He said he thought I should know that Gordon was a different kind of man than me. Accomplished. Well-connected. Financially sophisticated. I asked him what financially sophisticated meant exactly, given what his mother had done to our joint accounts. He didn't have an answer for that. Then he said the thing I mentioned at the beginning, that Gordon was everything I never was. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, "Terence, I hope he makes her happy. I genuinely do, and I hope you're the same." I hung up and ordered another espresso. I'd already told you that part. What I didn't tell you was that after I hung up, I sat there for a long time, not angry, not hurt the way I expected to be, just wondering when my son had decided I was less than, whether it had been a slow drift or a sudden turn, whether his mother had been the architect of it or whether it was simpler than that. Just a young man calculating who in his life had the most to offer and choosing accordingly. I didn't call him back. The wedding was in December. Charlotte, at a venue I'd been to before for other people's celebrations. Renee went. She didn't want to, she told me later, but she felt like she had to, for Terence, not for her mother. She called me the night before, and again the night after. The night after is when she told me what happened. She said the reception was what you'd expect. Money on display. Gordon's colleagues, his grown children from his first marriage, polite and cool. Claudette in an ivory dress, radiant in the way she'd always been in public, the version of herself she saved for audiences. Toasts were given. Terence gave one. Renee said it was well delivered, warm, the kind of speech that impresses people who don't know the backstory. Then one of Gordon's daughters, the older one, early 40s, a lawyer based in D.C., stood up. She wasn't on the program. She'd asked to say a few words. She said, "Dad, I love you. And because I love you, I need everyone in this room to know that I've hired a forensic accountant, and the results are very interesting." Then she sat down. Renee said the room went completely silent. Gordon looked at his daughter, Claudette's face, and Renee described this carefully. Did something she'd never seen it do before. It collapsed. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like something behind it gave way. Claudette excused herself from the table. She did not come back for 20 minutes. When she returned, she did not look at Gordon's daughter. She looked at no one in particular. The reception continued. People talked and drank and danced, because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. But something had shifted in the room, and everyone felt it. Renee said Terence found her near the end of the night. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since the ceremony. He asked her if she knew what was going on. She said she didn't know the details. He said, "Did Dad know about any of it?" She said, "Terence, Dad built a whole life in Portugal on what she left him." He didn't say anything. He hugged her and walked away. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Terence. It was a Sunday morning, 7 a.m., my time, which meant he'd called before he'd fully worked up the courage to talk himself out of it. He said, "Dad, I need to talk." I said, "I'm here." He told me he'd spent 2 weeks going back through things his mother had said about me over the years, things he'd believed without questioning, the way she'd framed the divorce, the way she'd positioned Gordon, the way she positioned Terence himself as someone who needed to choose the winning team. He said, "I said something terrible to you." I said, "You did." He was quiet. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really sorry. I want to tell you that I had a speech ready. Some measured, wise response. Something that showed I'd processed it all gracefully and arrived at a place of clean forgiveness. I didn't have any of that." I said, "Okay." And then I said, "Come visit me." He came in February. He flew into Lisbon on a Tuesday morning and I met him at the airport. He looked tired in the way people look when they've been doing a lot of thinking and not much sleeping. We hugged in the arrivals hall for longer than we had in years. Longer than we had since he was maybe 15 years old. We spent 4 days. I showed him the neighborhood, the Café Antonio. We walked to Belay and ate pastéis de nata, standing up outside the bakery like locals do. We talked, really talked, for the first time in I don't know how long, about his mother, about the marriage, about what I'd felt and what I'd done and why, about his life, about the things he'd been choosing and why. On the last night, we sat on my balcony with glasses of wine and watched the city lights. He asked me, "Are you happy here, Dad?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told him yes. Not perfectly, not without complications, but yes. The kind of happy that comes from living a life that actually belongs to you. He nodded. He said, "I want that." I told him it was available to him. It's available to most people. The problem is most of us spend decades building lives that look right from the outside and feel wrong from the inside, and we can't tell the difference anymore between the two. He flew home on a Saturday. I stood in the airport until he went through security. He turned around once and waved. That was enough. I still live in Moraria. My Portuguese is decent now. Graça says I've earned the right to be annoyed when people switch to English too quickly. Antonio's Cafe raised the price of espresso by 20 cents in the spring, which I consider a personal insult, and I told him so, and he laughed at me, which I consider fair. My monthly expenses run about $2,800. Rent, food, the occasional travel. I take a train to Porto some weekends. I've been to Sintra 4 times now, because it keeps being exactly what it was the first time. As for Claudette and Gordon, I don't know the details and I don't look for them. Renee mentioned the forensic accountant situation got complicated. I imagine it did. I hope they work it out. I mean that in the most neutral sense. I hope they find whatever resolution they find and that it doesn't require anything from me. Justice is a strange thing. People think it looks like victory, like you winning while someone else loses. In my experience, it looks quieter than that. It looks like an old man on a balcony in Lisbon with a glass of wine, watching lights come on across a city that doesn't know his name and doesn't need to. It looks like not having to perform anymore. It looks like not having to perform anymore. It looks like enough. I didn't set out to rebuild my life. I set out to survive the end of the one I had. The rebuilding happened anyway, the way things do when you stop standing in the way of them. If you've been standing in the way of your own life, and I suspect some of you listening know exactly what I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to tell you what the view looks like from the other side. It looks like morning light on the Tagus River. It looks like all the time in the world. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since I moved to Lisbon, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, the way you do when you finally have enough silence to actually think. Claudette didn't wake up one day and decide to become someone who would drain a joint savings account and hide a cash-out refinance from her husband. That happened gradually over years, probably. Small justifications, small compromises with honesty, and I didn't wake up one day not knowing when I was signing. That happened gradually, too. Years of trusting without verifying, of being present in the house but not quite paying attention to the details that mattered. We both built toward where we ended up. That's not me excusing what she did. What she did was wrong, clearly and deliberately. But I'm not interested in pretending I was a passive bystander in my own life. I wasn't watching carefully enough. That's on me. What I want to say about Terrence is this. He's not a bad person. He's a person who made a calculation and got it wrong. He looked at two men. His father, steady and unglamorous, and Gordon, wealthy and impressive, and he chose the one who looked like winning. That's a very human thing to do. It's also a failure of something I'd call moral intelligence, which is different from being smart. Terrence is smart. He can read a spreadsheet and run a meeting and network a room, but moral intelligence is slower. It asks, what is actually true here, not just what looks true. It asks, who has actually shown up for me, not just who is impressive right now. He had to learn that the hard way. Most of us do. The resilience part is what I think about most. Not because I'm particularly resilient by nature, I'm not. I'm stubborn, which is different. Stubbornness is just not quitting. Resilience is actually rebuilding something better than what fell down. What I found in Lisbon, in the walking, in the language classes, and the slow mornings on the balcony, was that I had more in me than I'd been using. 31 years of a marriage that needed me to be steady and predictable had narrowed me down to a function. When the marriage ended, the function ended too, and for a while that felt like nothing was left. But that was wrong. There was quite a lot left. There's usually quite a lot left, if you're willing to look. Claudette and Gordon will work out whatever they work out. Gordon's daughter stood up at that wedding and said one sentence, and whatever follows from that is the natural consequence of choices Claudette made over a long time. I don't feel satisfaction about it. I feel something closer to recognition. The sense that actions do eventually catch up with people, not because the universe is keeping score, but because reality is harder to outrun than we think. The life I have now is simple. Manageable expenses, good coffee, a friend who overcharges me by 20 cents and laughs when I complain, a son who flew across an ocean to say he was sorry, a daughter who never stopped calling. Morning light on the Tagus. That's what's left when you stop standing in the way of your own life. It turns out that's enough.